In this lecture, students, we're going to be looking at the determinants of foreign policy. Every country has foreign policy that they project to the world, and those policies guide their interactions with other countries. Those policies determine how they are perceived in the community of nations by other countries. Those policies really are the core of their own interaction with other countries as well. So we are going to take a look at the determinants of foreign policy. By determinants, we are talking about the factors on which a country builds its foreign policy. And that is very important because countries have foreign policies, but some are more pronounced than the others, right? So we're going to begin to understand why that is the case. Now, in the previous lecture, we looked at the components of foreign policy, and we looked at the different aspects of foreign policy, how foreign policy is put together. Here we are looking at the determinants. What determines foreign policy, and how do other countries view you as a sovereign country, right? These factors determine that. It's important to have a foundational knowledge of foreign policy, and this knowledge then guides your understanding of the determinants. All right, so let's take a look at the definition here. And this is a basic definition. There are many other definitions of foreign policy. This one is as good as any. It says foreign policy is a set of decisions. A set of decisions, right? So let's take a look at it closely. Set of decisions and actions that make up public policy of a government to protect the well-being of its citizens and represent their national interest before other countries and subjects of international law, right? So let's pause for a minute and take a look at this definition a bit closely. It says here, foreign policy is a set of decisions and actions, right, that make up public policy. So decisions by the government, right? This is decisions by the government, and actions by the government as well, right? So decisions by the government, actions by the government as well, that make up public policy of a government to protect the well-being of its citizens. So every good foreign policy is aimed at protection of its citizens, because you want to portray to other countries that you're capable of protecting your own. And your foreign policy then is hinged on that premise, right? So this is very important, students, for us to understand this, have this context. So to protect the well-being of its citizens and represent their national interest before other countries. A country then protects its citizens and then projects that view and projects that perception in international community. And that's why oftentimes when citizens of certain countries get in trouble, their home government, step in and try to gain their freedom. They try to gain their freedom. That's part of their national interest. That's part of their foreign policy. And before other countries, right? So represent their national interest before other countries and subjects of international law, right? So foreign policy intersects with international law. And oftentimes, sometimes they don't get along. Sometimes there is a contravention. Sometimes there is a negative interaction with international law. And sometimes it's congruent with international law. So understanding foreign policy is critical to understanding the determinants of foreign policy, students. Once again, foreign policy is the set of decisions and actions that make up public policy of a government. And again, those decisions and actions are coming from the government itself, right? And decisions and actions sometimes coming from the citizens themselves. And when they see those decisions and actions by the citizens, they begin to form their foreign policy around that. So, for example, if citizens say they want more representation, they want rebranding of their country, then the government listens and the government takes action, right? So that would be part of the action and decisions the people have taken. So here again, we say the decisions and actions that make up the public policy of a government to protect the well-being, right, of its citizens and represent their national interest before other countries and subjects of international law. This is very critical. It's very important for us to have this context and to look at foreign policy within this frame. All right, so now we'll begin to look at the determinants of foreign policy. And there are 8 of them. Now, of course, the list is not limited to 8. There are many more factors that could be included here. But we look at the 8 main factors that influence public policy. The first one is geography, right? The location of the country is very key. And some countries are located in strategic areas of the world, by seas, by oceans, or close to a country that is very powerful, etc. Right? The geography is so critical today that we cannot ignore it. Right? So the geography is a prominent and stable determinant of foreign policy. Right, and it's there, it's natural, of course, and it's there, and countries take advantage of it. For example, during the Cold War, Somalia and Ethiopia were very strategic because of their locations at the Horn of Africa, and both the Soviet Union and the United States and the West were vying for their attention. Right, they wanted to be sure that they get their attention because of their strategic location and because of the fact that they were located in an area that is very central in the world. In terms of shipping and in terms of having bases, military bases and so forth. In this case, then, geography will determine their foreign policy. Geography will have a lot to do with their foreign policy. And even your neighbors, right? If you have a hostile neighbor, that will determine your foreign policy. That will influence your foreign policy. So geography becomes a very, very important determinant. And also, when we talk about geography, we talk about size of the country, right? So the size of the country is very important as well. And of course, that comes with, natural elements like mountains and valleys and oceans and rivers, bodies of water, forests and so forth. Brazil is a huge country, as an example. It has the Amazon. And of course, it can shape its foreign policy around the Amazon. Right, the countries looking to come to deforest, come to, take away some of the resources and so forth. Brazil can have policies against that, policies guiding that, etc. So geography becomes a key element. The size of the country, the natural elements of the country. A country like Nepal has Mount Everest, which is the tallest mountain in the world. A country like Tanzania has Mount Kilimanjaro, and they can determine that the Sahara Desert spans through many countries, 11 countries, and those countries can use that natural element to determine their foreign policy as well, because there may be other countries interested in that natural element, and they may just formulate their foreign policy around that. And so this is very critical in terms of geography, right? And so geography then plays a critical role in terms of how countries, formulate their foreign policy. History is also key here. History is very important in terms of your culture, in terms of your origin, in terms of the challenges and how you came about as a people is very important here as well, right? History sometimes determines how you're seen by others, how you're perceived by others, your interaction with others. If your history is a good one, it may influence others, and your foreign policy may have more effect, maybe more impactful. History becomes key, and history determines a lot of things, right? When countries have good history, it determines a lot of things. History shapes the tradition and the image the society portrays. It's all embedded in their history. History becomes a key determinant of foreign policy. If your history is an ugly one, sometimes it will be difficult to fashion a foreign policy that is respectable, that other countries will come to say, yes, this is a good foreign policy and we can work with this, because they know your history. It's not a good one. History becomes key. It becomes pivotal to foreign policy formulation. Population is the next one. And population is a very interesting one because it impacts foreign policy very, very, very significantly. Now, take a look at the 2 largest countries in the world, India and China. They are very influential. They're very influential. They are very powerful economically, militarily, politically. They impact their region, and they are respected because they're huge countries. They are manufacturing countries. And because of their population, well, they can manufacture quite a lot. They have manpower. They have human resources. Because of their population, they have human resources. And when you have human resources, that goes with consumption, right? So consumption becomes part of the equation. And countries know that you have a large population, they will be looking to come to your country to invest because they know that you have volume. They'll be looking to come to your country to invest. And this is a very important point for us to highlight. When we talk about population, we have the example of India and China. We even have countries like Brazil and Pakistan in the top 10 in terms of population, Nigeria, Russia. All of those countries have big economies. They have large economies. And because they have large economies, right, countries are looking to come to invest, and they formulate their foreign policies around their population, around, the need for countries to come in and invest in their countries. So population plays a very pivotal role as well. Your population determines your weight in most cases, determines resources, determines ability to interact, determines your capacity in terms of direct foreign investments, because countries know that you have the value. And if they establish businesses in your country, they know that they will have, quite a lot of resources because you have the volume of people that will be consuming their products. Natural resources also determine foreign policy. Natural resources, countries that are endowed with natural resources, translates to economic capacity and translates to ability in areas of business, and translating into ability to interact with others in the international community on equal footing. And that determines your foreign policy as well. Countries in the Middle East, the ones that are very, very powerful in terms of that have economic resources and so forth, they are interacting well with the international community. They are invited to G7 meetings, and they are part of international organizations because of their resources, their wealth. And the resources become key too, because countries can fashion their national interest, they can fashion their foreign policy around their natural resources and determine who they do business with and who they don't do business with. And they can sanction others because they have the ability and the capacity to do so, because they have the wealth to do so. And they are treated equally on the global stage because because countries know they have economic capacity. They have natural resources. We go back to Amazon, for example, that's a huge natural resource. We go to the Mount Everest, that's a huge natural resource. We go to, countries again in the Middle East that have oil deposits, that's a key natural resource. Countries that have minerals like coltan and have diamonds and gold and bauxites and all of those very, very precious materials. They have natural resources, and they can fashion their foreign policies around those resources. So natural resources become so critical in the grand scheme of things when we talk about foreign policy. And every country that has natural resources has the potential to have an impactful foreign policy. Every country that has natural resources that is really well sought after in the global stage, in the global context, has the potential to have very impactful natural resources. Now, do all countries take advantage of this? The answer is no. Some countries do. The United States with enormous resources. Canada with enormous resources. Canada can sanction other countries because they have the resources, because they're self-sufficient, right? So let's put that here, right? So capacity is associated with this. Self-sufficiency, this is self-sufficiency, is associated with this as well, right? You have capacity, you have self-sufficiency, that gives you ability, you have ability, right, etc., to do things for yourself, to do things for others as well. Natural resources give you all of these abilities, and a country can fashion its foreign policy based on natural resources. All right, so the fifth element or determinant is economy, and that ties in with natural resources, ties in with population as well, and ties in with geography as well, right? So the economy of a country is very, very important. It's a very important factor. Countries with very strong economy will have a foreign policy that is very impactful because countries respect that country. Countries in the international community respect that country because it has a very strong economy. And because it has strong economy, it can impact countries in the region. It can sanction countries around the world. It can say, we will not deal with you economically, and that will mean something to those countries. And they can fashion their foreign policy around the strength of the economy. So if you look around the world, countries, the G7 countries are very powerful, and they're sanctioning other countries. They're sanctioning Russia, for example. Begin to look at the dynamism of the economic strength of countries, begin to understand how that impacts foreign policy. So students, I will begin to look at these determinants, begin to get a sense as to how countries are formulating their foreign policy, and why some countries have more impact than the others. These are some of the factors. Countries that have weak economy will hardly have very impactful foreign policy. These factors go hand in hand with strength. It will strengthen all of these areas. So countries with very good economy, with high GDP, right, and high manufacturing rate are likely to have very impactful foreign policy, and they are likely to build their foreign policy on the economy and determine the countries they do business with, and are able to give loans to countries, and are able to determine which countries they will not do business with. And they're able to go to the international stage and make pronouncements that have weight, that people listen to and say, well, this country has spoken, we better pay attention. That's economy. That's what economy does, students. And begin to look at this factor as a very, very special factor that most countries hinge their foreign policy on. And I give example of the United States. I give example of countries like France and Britain and Germany. These are very high-performing countries that have a very strong economy. And those economies then determine how they interact with others. All right, so we go to military capacity, right? So military capacity is also very important, because here we are talking about the capacity of a country to impact other countries in the military sense. And that also determines the foreign policy, because then what that means is they're able to assist other countries, they're able to play a role in peacekeeping, they're able to threaten other countries to fall in line, and they use their military capacity as a strength. They leverage their military capacity. Right. So this is also very important when we look at foreign policy determinations, foreign policy formations as well. We begin to look at military power. The countries that have military strength, the United States, Russia, Germany, France, the UK, countries with nuclear power, they have capacity. They can threaten others. They can impact others as well. This is what we mean by military strength. And military strength determines your foreign policy, because others are afraid of you, others pay attention, they know you have the strength to act, to impact them negatively, and they pay attention. And so a lot of countries use their military strength. And then the next one is ideology. The ideology that you have impacts your foreign policy as well, right? Ideology is very critical in this sense. Ideology, economic ideology, political ideology, could be societal and cultural ideology, religious ideology, etc. Impact your foreign policy. And you can base your foreign policy on that. You have a particular ideology as to, for example, capitalism. Well, that impacts your foreign policy. For example, communism, socialism, that impacts your foreign policy as well. If you have an ideology of free market system, that impacts your policy. Socially, if you have an ideology of human rights, that impacts your foreign policy as well. And finally, development and stability. This is where we look at infrastructure. The infrastructure you have that attracts businesses as a country. And infrastructure attracts businesses because businesses come when they see stability. They see growth. They see opportunity for growth and to make a profit. They come to your country. They invest directly in your country. And you can fashion, as a country, fashion your foreign policy around your stability and your infrastructure and the fact that you have capacity as a country. So students begin to see how all of this is playing out, how these ideologies become so critical, how these factors become so critical when we talk about foreign policy formation. The determinants of foreign policy become so critical that countries seek to have these things in place. They can formulate their foreign policy from positions of strength, knowing fully well that other countries will pay attention and they will have an impact in the global stage. So the determinants of foreign policy are geography, geography, history, population, natural resources, economy, military strength or capacity, ideology, your development, your stability, your ability to impact others. And when they see that you're stable, people come. When they see that you're stable, tourists come. When they see that you're stable, companies come. When they see that you're stable, government approach you to do business. And that determines, in a way, shapes your foreign policy as well. So these are the determinants of foreign policy. And a lot of countries around the world look at these factors and see how they can leverage these factors to have more impact on the global stage. All right, so in the next lecture, we're going to be looking at how foreign policy plays a role in relationship with countries.